And the approaches were desk research and expert interviews. In terms of the expert interviews, important stakeholders were selected, and 25 of them covering personalities from exporter organization, service providers, retailers here in Europe, researchers, members of the industry association, and just to be able to have a view of what is going on. And of course, the criteria for selecting the interviewees were the fact that they were knowledgeable, they were interested in being interviewed, and they hold a range of opinion on what is going on in Kenya. Each interview took about 45 minutes, and interviews were recorded and field notes were taken. In terms of analyzing the data, I followed what is called the qualitative data analysis approach, which means you have to transcribe. Transcribe means you have to write out all the interview and to type them out. And you have to have a framework with which you want to analyze the data, and that was what I presented earlier. And each of the interviews were written out and they were categorized following the conceptual framework I presented earlier. Afterwards, they were linked together. Comments that have similar connection were put together, and this was what formed part of the data analysis exercise. Now, in terms of the results, don't forget I showed you 4 key elements initially. In this case, in this slide, I'm showing the technical element and the financial element. The results show that, well, in spite of all the donor interventions, the number of smallholders that have been trained in the global gap standard have increased. But unfortunately, market access is still an issue. It's not enough to train producers, small-scale producers in this case, but it's more important that they are able to achieve the ultimate goal of linking high-value markets. And only the producers that were linked to exporters were compelled to change their agronomic practices. Don't forget I said most of those cultural practices that are common with smallholders in Kenya are not what the global gap standard stipulates. So only those that are linked to exporters felt compelled because of the power of the connection. They have to because they are under the outgrower schemes and they really have to change their agronomic practices. Well, there are still non-conformances. What I mean by non-conformances are there are control points which, as a producer, you must comply with. And if you fail, it's tagged non-conformance with the control point. So most smallholders still show some degree of non-conformances. And in this wise, exporters now need to spend a lot more on monitoring to be sure that they can comply. I mean, don't forget, exporters are also linked to importers. Importers are linked to retailers, and they have to be in business. So they have to spend a lot more to monitor the small-scale producers. The financial element, the cost of, in general, smallholders could not, and maybe still now, can still not bear the cost because, I mean, you have to build irrigation facilities, you have to pay for inspection and auditing, you have to do laboratory tests, which, I mean, these costs are sizable, and smallholders are not able to bear this cost. Talking about the managerial element, well, evidence from the research show that record keeping is improving. Kenya has a relatively high literate farmers, and in this case, record keeping is gradually increasing, and compliance managers from the exporter organization and also from what is called the produce marketing organization, this organization formed by producers, ensure that this practice is up and going. Group management is still very poor. I mean, the group dynamics is a challenge. Bringing smallholders together and asking them to comply to follow a single rule is still a very big issue, and this is very important to be able to organize producer groups and link high-value opportunities. Entrepreneurial skill is still very low. Most smallholders still don't take farming as a business, rather farming is, to most of them, a hobby. And in terms of market access, opportunism is a term used to describe a scenario where somebody takes advantage of the others in a given situation. the result shows that opportunism, particularly from exporter, is still increasing. And of course, unfortunately also, smallholders are also side selling. There are instances where some exporters would have invested large amount of money in trying to get a producer unit certified, and at the time of harvest, you see some other brokers, some other exporters coming around to pay some 20 Kenyan shillings higher than what was agreed with the exporter, some 40 Kenyan shillings, and these practices jeopardizes the opportunity of linking the supply chain. Well, in general, smallholders are calling for higher prices. Well, this particularly was due to the presence of some other private standards like fair trade, which indeed has a different agenda compared to the global gap standard, but smallholders are just calling for better prices for their certified produce. And the practice of pushing down cost and risk is still very prominent. And this is not just between exporters and retailers. This is also happening, exporters and smallholders. This is also happening all down the chain, right from the retailers. For example, in the UK last year, a lot of the retailers were engaged in price wars just shortly after the recession, and they wanted to gain more customers, and they would just tell their producers, their importers to get produce to them at all costs, and they would just give a base price. If you can supply, then you don't have a market. So ultimately, what that means is that cost is pushed down to that poor guy in Kisumu or to that poor woman in Nakuru, who has to, all in the bid to link high value opportunity to be paid less. And these practices are still commonplace. So in summarizing the results, evidence from the research shows that 6 years down the line, Kenyan fresh fruits and vegetables smallholders are still challenged by the introduction of global gap standard. They still have a lot of challenges meeting the technical elements, the managerial, the financial, the market access, and they are still grappling with great capacity. You need a lot of knowledge investment into the global gap standard to be able to comply, and their commitment is also not there. Smallholders are not known to make long-term investments. They are only thinking of what they can get in the medium term, and this is not totally what goes in line with the global gap standard. Smallholders are not really actors. They are rather what I call hang-ons. They have high level of dependence on exporters, which erodes their bargaining power. In the supply chain, once you don't have bargaining power, you are more or less always at a disadvantage, just like what I explained earlier, in terms of cost being pushed down on you, risk being pushed down on you, and the rest of them. And again, exclusion is still ongoing. Again, 6 years down the line, it shows that intervention by stakeholders have been uncoordinated. When the news came in 2003, a lot of those development agencies sprung into action. Some of them, in what I can say, did a little assessment of what was really going on. Well, immediately they were building pack houses, immediately they were training smallholders, and eventually you saw a situation where the interventions were not really coordinated and were not really targeted well. Like I said earlier, stakeholders, particularly donors, acted hastily. They need to do something and do it urgently. Led a lot of them into interventions that were not really targeted well. And it also shows that a chain-wide approach, you have to look at the chain to be able to intervene and look at where the chain is weakest. It might not really mean in the aspect of training smallholders. It could just be that communication needs to be improved better, and then we can have a supply chain that is more responsive to the demands of the high-end actors. And the result also shows that exporter-led interventions have worked better. Why? Because exporters are the ones linked to the importers. Importers, they have to be in business, and they have to do all it takes to get smallholders on board for them to continuously be in business. And this is just a table showing differentiating between the two interventions. Donor-led interventions usually took the approach of projects, 3 to 5